we often believe or we wish to become grandmasters overnight without difficulties. Unfortunately, such a thing is not possible. What instead is possible is the following: that you get a strong theoretical foundation, that in this case, for example, through understanding different pawn structures, and then you practice in tournament games what you watch in this video and see if you understood it or not, or eventually what do you have to improve your understanding of that. In this case, this book that is all about pawn structures is in the beginning about isolated pawns, and there is this beautiful game which is Smyslov against Karpov in the USSR Championship in Leningrad 1971. I want to show it to you because once I was also playing the English c4 and I really lost badly a game against c5. So maybe if I would have studied this book before, I could have avoided that defeat. Knight f3, knight f6. Because in the time I did prepare theoretically, learning the theory, but I do believe that this book, with the idea of teaching us about pawn structures and what to do in certain situation with a particular pawn structure, it's much more valuable than learning the opening and the opening moves. Knight c3, d5, c takes d5, knight takes d5, e3, e6, d4, c takes d4, e takes d4. Here it says, this time we have a case of an isolated pawn in the English opening, which many players would rather avoid by playing 5 knight c3, knight takes c3, right? Instead of e6, followed by g6. As a matter of fact, we have transposed into the Caro-Kann pawn of attack. Can you imagine? We have transposed into the Caro-Kann pawn of attack. Amazing. So we think that this was an English and this wasn't an English. This is now a Caro-Kann pawn of attack. And the problem is that maybe your opponent doesn't know it, and so it doesn't play correctly. So that's why it's more important to know the pawn structure than all the rest. The game continues with bishop e7, bishop d3, castle, castle, knight c6, rook e1, and knight f6. And here it says that a frequent alternative here has been bishop f6. There is not much logic in the retreat from the center, since white's next move towards the plan knight b4, which would impose full control on the isolated pawn. Okay, so obviously he played this because he wanted to play this and this, but if you remember in another video I told you the move would be this. So as you can see, sometimes these moves are needed to thwart the opponent plan, right? Instead, if it was just to prevent a pinning, maybe it's a waste of time. But in this case you want to prevent black from getting total control on d5. And of course, here in the book write another thing that is important to remember. This move makes possible bishop c2 and queen d3. So it's also an interesting maneuver. b6, bishop c2, bishop b7, queen d3, and rook c8. And guess what? Rook c8 is a mistake. Here it says, it is somewhat strange that these two great players only notice the consequences of this error in analysis afterwards. Now, so early in the game, the decisive breakthrough in the center was possible. Okay. So why it was possible? Let me show you why. Because in the game, guess what Smyslov played? Smyslov played bishop g5, which is not a good move. The move to play was d5. And when you play e takes d5, then the other guy will play bishop g5, g6, it says here, because obviously if he takes here, the next move is checkmate, so be careful. After g6, rook takes e7, and this is really great, right? Why? Because once if you take with a queen, you have this move and then you lose that. If you take with a knight, you lose this. So clearly black would have lost kind of earlier. Now let's return back to the position. Okay, so this was the position in which Karpov played rook c8. That is a mistake, but Smyslov didn't punish him for that. He didn't find the right move. Now keep in mind that this is 1971. 1972, Fischer gets the World Championship, and Karpov should have been ready to meet him in 1974. Probably he wouldn't have been ready, and he would have been another slaughter by Fischer against the Soviet. And maybe the Soviet would have obviously retaliated with something physical, because they couldn't lose twice, right? Okay, so with that said, we saw bishop g5, g6 to avoid the checkmate on there once it's removed the defender, and Smyslov continue with rook a d1. Black plays knight d5, bishop h6, rook e8, bishop a4, and a6. Here in the book they say knight takes e3 is not gonna work, and they give a line, okay? Now, however, after a6, white plays knight takes d5, and here it was better to play e takes d5, but Karpov played queen takes d5. Again, another imprecision or mistake. Why I'm pointing it out? Because in the time, in the chess world, they were saying that Fischer pieces generally would land on the perfect square, while this guy that should have been the one to challenge Fischer clearly is not landing well. However, it's only through losing that you can learn, because unfortunately when we win we all get excited and learn not much, right? While when we lose we actually learn a lot. Okay, so what did the white play? White played queen e3, and now black makes a serious mistake, that is bishop f6. it seems there are two different possibilities. Queen h5 proposed by Ove, former world champion, while Korchnoi fought to play rook d8. Sorry, I didn't change the orientation of the board, but I hope you understand that is okay. Okay, so after bishop f6, there is bishop b3, wow, and queen h5. Again, not the best at this point, and maybe it was better to retreat, but okay. And now, guys, try to pause the video and see what you would do in this situation, because this is why we are watching this game, and this is why we are going to study and buy this book, because this book is gonna teach you something. If you have someone to tell you, hey, pause at this moment and think what would you do if you were white, what would you play? Smyslow played d5, and this is kind of important. When you start to push the isolated pawn, it's really important, right? So you cannot take, because queen takes e8, rook takes e8, rook takes e8, checkmate, right? So black plays knight d8, and here again, what would you play if you were white? What are you going to play if you were white? So pause the video for a minute or two and try to think. d6 is the move, and the author writes again the same metamorphosis with the same brutal consequences. The appearance of a far advanced passed pawn represents a victory in itself. And now he just doesn't give any more annotation, he just gives the rest of the game, because probably after this move the game is considered over at grandmaster level. Okay, rook c5, d7, rook e7, queen f4, bishop g7, queen b8, queen takes h6, queen takes d8, bishop f8, rook e3, bishop c6, and now there is a beautiful move by white. Maybe you can pause a second and see what you would do in this situation. White played queen takes f8, and after queen takes f8 he promoted again to queen, and Karpov at this point gave up. Here it says, such a crushing defeat must have left a strong impression on Karpov. However, a couple of years later he was again to find himself suffering with the isolated pawn. One can never be cautious enough. And the next game that he presents, that I will not show you here because we need to move on, is Portish Karpov, played in Milano 1975. And it's a kind of tournament that I am trying to write a book if I have a little more time. Unfortunately, life is a little busier right now. I hope you enjoyed this book, the various examples. Of course, there are many more pawn structures examined in the book, different from the isolated queen pawn, and eventually we will see them later. Thank you for watching.